Alright, so we've seen how to create solid primitives, and we've seen how to perform some Boolean operations on those solid primitives to make more complex shapes. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, modeling with primitives is kind of a, well, I don't know, primitive way to work. It's kind of a pain in the neck. It's kind of like you're looking through a box of Legos, trying to find that perfect Lego that's the exact shape that you need in order to make your masterpiece come together. And at times that can be really challenging. So there is another tool in our list of tools that we have for working with 3D modeling. It allows you to create solids without having to rely on the primitives. Not a bad idea to know what the primitives are, though. Lots of CAD programs have primitive shapes as building blocks, and then you're expected to modify them, and twist them, and tweak them, and squish them, and pull them, and stretch them until they're what you want. But in AutoCAD, we can go about the creation process a lot more directly. So let's talk about how to do that. We're going to make sure that we are in world coordinates, the WCS, World Coordinate System. And if you want, you can look in a flat orientation. And to do what we're going to do, we're going to actually draw some lines. Now, you don't want to use the line tool if you know you want to turn whatever you draw into a 3D object. You're actually going to use the Polyline tool. Alright, so we're going to draw some lines here, and it doesn't have to be anything too fancy, but we want to make sure that we do this. We want to make sure that our last point falls back on our first point, and if you want to ensure that's going to happen, you can close that polyline so that we have a complete shape. That's a complete closed polygon. Now, that doesn't mean you're up the creek if you drew something with lines. You can still work with lines. Just make sure before you go on to this next step, you join those lines together. So here's the join tool on the modify panel, and you want to select them, and of course joining lines turns them into a polyline, right? Alright, so we just drew some lines that are closed shapes, and what we're going to do is on our 3D tab, we're going to look on the modeling panel. We're going to look at our first main modeling tool, and it's called Extrude. Now, extrusion is a process that's used in manufacturing to create shapes. And by shapes, I mean solid shapes. Now, in manufacturing, we have to start with a plastic material. And by plastic material, I don't mean plastic, I mean something that can be squished, right? So this steel billet is a plastic material. When it's hot enough, it can be formed and shaped, right? So typically metals are heated very hot, and then what happens is they are pushed through a die, and on the other side of that die, the ram forces it in, and on the other side there is a shape, and what we do is we're pushing through to create the desired shape. Here's an example. There's a ram, and it's pushing, and you see it comes out as a tube, right, as a cylinder. Well, if we had different shape openings, like this diamond or this L shape, as we are forcing that plastic material through the die, it's going to take whatever shape was in the die. Now, I've got this really fancy tool I wanted to show you. It's called Dora the Explorer's Play-Doh Fun Factory. And same principle, right? Play-Doh is a plastic material. It's easily formed and shaped, and we don't even have to get it super hot. The way this thing works is we take our Play-Doh and we stick it into the holding area, and then we use a ram. In this case, it's just a lever. But we're also going to select a die, and the die will be whatever shape we want our extrusion to take. And you see as the lever goes down and it forces that through, then all of a sudden we've got a solid extrusion based on the shape of the die, right? In this case, we're working with a six-pointed star. As we are forcing the Play-Doh through the opening in there, well, now we're getting a bar with those 6 edges on it. Alright, so there's Dora the Explorer's version. Now let's take a look at the AutoCAD version. Okay, so here's the die, here's the shape I want to have for my final result. I'll click on the Extrude tool and I'll select my profile and I'll hit enter. And then as I move my cursor up and down, do you see what's happening? We're creating a solid object, right? This is a 3D solid. It's legit. It's not going to have all those wonderful properties that the primitives do because a lot of the shape, right, was determined by the grips, by the profile we used. So we can control things like the height in the properties. Okay, but that's really all the properties are going to give you access to. The actual shape itself is tied into the polyline. So if you wanted to, you could go in and you could modify your 3D shape by adjusting the points on that polyline. Right, so I'm making some modifications here and you can see how the solid shape is changing. We'll go back into wireframe to conceptual and we see it's a legit solid. So that was a polyline. This is also a polyline, so I should be able to extrude it. And if you want to give it a specific height, you type in 1, enter. Alright, now this has a height of 1. Very good. What we don't want to do, we don't want to draw lines and then leave a gap. Because if we draw lines and leave a gap and go to extrude, we're not going to get the results we were hoping for. Right? That looks like there's some solidness to it, but you know what this is? This is really a bunch of surfaces, a bunch of regions. Okay, so if our polyline has gaps, it will not close into a solid. Make sure you close. If your polyline has gaps, then it's going to extrude, but just the lines will extrude into a surface. Okay, not what we want. Some other stuff you don't want to do. We don't want to be sloppy. And here's what I mean. Draw a line, draw a line, draw a line, draw a line, go back, draw a line again. See, that's some sloppy stuff there, right? When you go to extrude this, you're going to have mayhem. So it might do something, or it might just say, nope, can't do it. Okay, so be really careful about drawing. If you draw, and you're in the habit of drawing over things you drew once before, right? I have a line, and a line, and a line, and a line, and I even snuck in a little extra line there, right? Well, you can join all this mess together, and it looks like it's a closed polyline, but then again, when you go to extrude, you're going to find it's not going to do anything. So be precise, don't be messy, and that'll take care of most of the problem. This also would be considered messy, right? It's not touching, it's not closed. Even though that shape is encapsulated out here, that's still not a closed polyline. It's going to give you surfaces. Alright, so now why are we talking about extrusion? Well, simply put, it's probably the easiest way to create precise 3D shapes. I use it all the time. I very rarely use primitives unless I want to make a donut, you know. For the most part, you can draw any 2D shape you want and then give it some extrusion, and now you've got a 3D solid. Right? And then knowing about things like the rotate gizmo, well, we can give them a click and we can stand them up and we can make them behave however we want. So why don't you try doing a little bit of this? Remember, we need to draw with polylines, or we need to convert our lines into polylines using the draw tool. Otherwise, we're not going to get good results when it's time to create extrusion. Also, don't be sloppy with your drawing. Be as neat as you can. Don't have lines on top of lines or any of that other nonsense. Okay? And then be cautious that what you're getting really is an extrusion of solid. When you hover over it, if it says this is a surface, you know something has gone wrong. Right? We'll take a look at some extrusion I did to create this part here. Complex shape. I would have spent an awful long time trying to figure out how to make this thing using primitives. So let me run you through my process of how I made this with several steps, with a couple of sketches and a couple of simple extrusions and a fillet.